Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're diving into a moment that changes everything. What happens when James finally finds Diep, and she reveals the painful deal his father used to force her away. And then, the unthinkable happens in a luxury hotel room. Rain falls in a soft drizzle over the old street, turning cracked pavement dark and glossy. James moves fast, shoulders tight, breath caught high in his chest. His shoes splash through puddles, but he doesn't slow. He doesn't look at the neighbors' windows. All he sees is the familiar door at the end of the lane. When he reaches it, his hand hesitates. Then he pushes it open. The house smells of damp wood and old memories. Dim light pools across the floor. In the far corner, Diep is folded into herself, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, like she's trying to disappear. James steps inside and stops. His voice is low and careful. "Why are you avoiding me?" Diep flinches, but keeps her eyes on the floor. Tears slide down her cheeks, silent and steady. "I'm sorry," she whispers. "I'm sorry for everything." James swallows hard. He expected anger. Instead, worry floods him, sharp and helpless. He takes a slow step closer. "Diep, look at me." She doesn't. "I broke my promise," she says, voice shaking. "I said I wouldn't run. I said I'd stay." Her head dips. "But I don't know how to face things. I never learned." James's brow tightens. "What do you mean?" Diep's fingers twist together. "Since I was a kid, nobody taught me how to stand my ground. When something got too heavy, running away was the only thing that felt safe." The words hang between them. Confession and plea. James lowers himself slightly, bringing his eyes closer to hers. His voice softens. "Don't run anymore." She finally looks up a little. Her eyes are red, raw with shame. James reaches out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she doesn't, he takes her hand, warm, steady. "I want you by my side," he says, "so I can protect you." Diep trembles like she's holding back the truth with everything she has. "It was your father," she says, voice cracking. He came to me." James goes still. "He offered me money," Diep continues. James's jaw tightens, but he doesn't interrupt. He just holds her hand like it's the one thing keeping her anchored. He said he'd pay for my mother's treatment," she whispers. "And he said he'd help my brother, keep him safe from people who were after him. Gangsters." Her voice thins. He said it like it was nothing. James's eyes flash. "And then he told me I had to leave you," Diep says. James's breath catches. "He made it a choice," Diep whispers. "My mother, or you. My family, or you." She looks at James like she's begging him to believe her. "I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just wanted it to stop." James stares at her, eyes glassy. "Diep, I didn't leave because I wanted to," she says, wiping her cheek. "I left because I was trapped." James turns his face away for a second, fighting an explosion that isn't meant for her. When he looks back, his voice is quieter. "I can feel it," he says. The pressure he put on you." Diep's eyes flicker. "Every time I face him, I can hardly breathe," James admits. His grip tightens. "So I get it. I do." He hesitates, then says the truth he hates. "Sometimes I don't even know how to choose between my father and the woman I love." Diep's shoulders sag, relief and pain at once. She's been carrying the fear of being the bad one alone. James shifts closer, still gentle. "Promise me something." Diep blinks. "What?" "No more running." Diep's lips tremble. Fear pushes back, whispering all the ways love has been taken from her before. "James, promise me we face it together," he says. "Whatever it is." Diep nods, small at first. then stronger. "I promise," she whispers. "I'll try. I'll really try." James's shoulders sag like he's been holding his breath for days. He lifts their joined hands and presses her knuckles lightly, like a vow. "Since I left you," Diep says, voice softer, "my life feels like it lost half its vitality." James's face breaks. "The same for me," he says. "Without you, my life is missing half its soul." Diep's breath catches. Then James pulls her into him. Firm, close, real. Diep clutches the back of his coat. Her forehead presses into his shoulder. For a moment, they just breathe. Hard, uneven, like they've been underwater and finally surfaced. The rain taps the roof. The house creaks. The world outside keeps moving. But inside, something shifts. The pressure doesn't vanish. Poverty doesn't dissolve. Her past still aches, but right now, love becomes the anchor. James pulls back just enough to look at her and presses a soft kiss to her forehead. Slow, deliberate. "I'm here," he whispers. "I've got you." Diep's fingers curl around his wrist as if she's testing whether he's real. James keeps his palm open, steady. No force, no pressure. He wipes a tear from her cheek with his thumb and speaks like he's building a bridge plank by plank. "We'll take care of your mother," he says, "and your brother too. But not like that. Not with you as the price." Diep's breath stutters. "How? I don't have anything." "You have me," James answers. "We'll find the best doctor we can afford, and we'll ask for help the right way. If someone is threatening your brother, we don't negotiate in the dark. We bring it into the light. We call the right people. We document everything." She searches his face, scared to hope. James leans closer, voice firm but gentle. "And if my father ever corners you again, you come to me first, even if you're shaking, even if you think I'll be angry. Promise?" Diep nods, quickly, tears trembling on her lashes. "I promise." Diep's tears keep coming, but now they carry relief too. Hope. They stay like that until the shaking eases and the silence stops feeling like punishment. Outside, the rain keeps falling. Inside, warmth begins to spread, chasing back the shadows of goodbye. They don't pretend they're safe. They just decide, together, that they won't face the storm alone anymore. In the luxurious hotel room, everything is quiet in a way that feels expensive. Thick carpet swallowing footsteps, heavy curtains, warm golden light turning every surface soft. Diep stands near the edge of the room, shoulders stiff, hands close to her body. James stays a few steps away, watching her carefully. Not hovering, not pushing, just present. Then the door opens. The chairman steps in. Before he speaks, the chairman's gaze drops to Diep and James's intertwined hands. For a second, his expression flickers, like he's seeing his son not as a CEO, but as the boy who once waited by a hospital bed praying for a miracle. He clears his throat, but the sound breaks. "I couldn't sleep," he admits quietly. "I kept hearing my own words. I kept seeing her face when I told her to leave." James doesn't move, but his eyes harden with hurt. The chairman looks back to Diep. "I brought you here because I don't want my fear to keep running your life," he says. "Not anymore. Or James's life ever again." Up close, he looks older than Diep expected, genuinely tired. His posture is still formal, still powerful, but his face has changed. He doesn't look like a man coming to win. He looks like a man coming to surrender. He takes 2 slow steps in. His voice shakes. "Diep." Diep freezes. Surprise flashes, then tangles with fear from the day she was driven away. James's jaw tightens, not with anger, but readiness. The chairman swallows hard. He doesn't sit. He doesn't command. He walks closer, slowly, and then he drops to his knees. The sound is soft against the carpet, but the moment hits like a shockwave. Diep's eyes widen. She shifts back half a step, expecting a trick, but it isn't. Tears roll down the chairman's cheeks. His voice cracks. "My child, forgive me." Diep's mouth opens, but no words come. "I was wrong," he says. "I was wrong to forbid your love with James." Diep stands stunned. This is the man who once spoke like an order was truth, and now he's on the floor crying. He looks up at her, eyes wet and honest. "I didn't do it because I hated you," he whispers. "I did it because I was afraid." He speaks slowly, like he's walking through his own past barefoot. "When I was younger, I had nothing," he says. "Poor, humiliated. People looked at me like I was less than air." Diep's breath tightens. "My mother got sick. Cancer," he continues. "Doctors talked about treatment like it was a luxury. I counted money that wasn't enough." James's face shifts. He's heard fragments, but never like this. "I couldn't save her with kindness," the chairman says. "I couldn't save her with love. I had to become hard. I built myself into someone people couldn't ignore." Diep watches him, heart caught between anger and understanding. "But even then," he says softly, "I never had to sacrifice love the way you did." Diep's eyes sting. "You were forced to choose between your mother and the man you love," he whispers, "and you carried it alone." The chairman's shoulders slump. "When I saw you," he admits, "all I could think was, what if James ends up like me? What if the world humiliates him the way it humiliated me? What if he gives everything to someone who can't protect him back?" His voice cracks. "So I tried to control him. I built walls and called it protection." James steps forward, slow, torn between old anger and love. He can't shut off. "I thought I was protecting you," the chairman whispers to his son. "But I was protecting my fear." James's throat tightens. The chairman turns back to Diep. "I won't stand in your way anymore," he says, voice unsteady but firm. "Your life is yours." Diep stares, frozen. "I'm sorry," he whispers. "I'm sorry I pushed you into suffering. I'm sorry I made you feel like love had to be earned." Diep's tears fall, quiet, steady, not triumph, understanding. James kneels beside his father. "Dad," he says, voice shaking. The chairman's face crumples. He reaches out and James catches him. They hold each other, father and son, like years of silence finally cracked open. After a moment, the chairman pulls back enough to speak. "I'm going back abroad," he says. "I'm stepping away." James blinks. "What?" "I'm handing the company to you," the chairman says. "You're ready, and I need to learn how to live without gripping everything until it breaks." James looks stunned. "I'm not asking you," the chairman adds gently. "I'm trusting you." James's eyes fill. "Thank you," he says, small and real. The chairman touches James's cheek briefly. One rare gesture that feels like years of withheld affection finally escaping. Diep watches, like she's afraid it will vanish if she blinks. Her chest feels lighter, like a window opened in a room she's been trapped in for years. The chairman rises slowly, dignity still there, but no longer sharpened into a weapon. "I can't erase what I did," he says to Diep, "but I can stop doing it." Diep nods through the tightness in her throat. "I understand," she whispers. James walks to her and takes her hand, holding it openly. No hiding, no hesitation. The chairman watches that gesture, and instead of resisting, he nods, as if acknowledging what should have been obvious all along. For the first time, father and son stand in the same room without barriers of class, power, or pride, just imperfect people trying to do better. Beyond the window, the city glitters with lights, steady and alive. And inside, something shifts. Love is no longer being blocked by prejudice dressed up as protection. Jame squeezes Diep's hand. She squeezes back, stronger than before. The air feels clearer, and for the first time in a long time, the future doesn't look like a wall. It looks like a door.
Cơn mưa lất phất trên con phố cũ khi Jame lao vào căn nhà quen thuộc và thấy Diep con mình trong góc. Diep thú nhận từ nhỏ cô luôn chọn trốn chạy vì không ai dạy cách đối mặt. Cô kể sự thật, cha Jame đã ép cô rời đi bằng lời đề nghị tiền chữa bệnh cho mẹ và bảo vệ anh trai khỏi bọn giang hồ, buộc cô phải chọn gia đình hay Jame. Jame đau nhưng thấu hiểu vì chính anh cũng ngạt thở mỗi lần đối diện cha. Anh nắm tay Diep, yêu cầu cô hứa không bỏ chạy nữa và cùng anh vượt qua áp lực. Hai người ôm nhau, tình yêu trở thành điểm tựa chữa nghèo khó vào quá khứ. Sau đó, tại một khách sạn sang trọng, chủ tịch bất ngờ vì gói xin lỗi, thú nhận nỗi sợ nghèo khổ, trao công ty cho Jame và chấp nhận lời đề nghị để họ tự quyết, mở ra hy vọng mới.